Hello, and thank you for joining me for this webinar about best practices for elementary small groups from referral to closure. I am Sarah Kirk, and I am delighted that you have joined me for this presentation. I love small groups. I love elementary school. I love school counseling. So we're going to have some fun together today. Please don't hesitate to reach out if I mention anything that you'd like a link to or like more information on. My email is there at the bottom. I also post about a lot of these types of things on my social media, counselor_Kirk. So I hope you'll join us as we continue to work towards building comprehensive school counseling programs that serve all students. So today we're going to be talking about small groups, like we said, from start to finish. So I hope that this will give you good information about how to select participants for small groups, how to really make sure that we're running effective small groups, and then making sure that at the end we're assessing our small groups, which I know isn't always the most fun, but it is very important. So I decided as I was preparing this presentation to break this up just like the Ask a National model is broken up. We define, manage, deliver, and assess our comprehensive school counseling programs, and it fit really well to describe our small groups in this way as well. So we're going to start off today defining small groups, making sure we know the different types of small groups. Then we'll talk about the managing of our small groups, really making sure we're preparing and planning effectively, and that gets us ready to deliver the small groups to make sure we're using effective lesson planning and strong curriculum to deliver good, effective, efficient, and impactful small groups. And then we'll close out with the assess, making sure that we are looking to the data to see if our small groups are effective. So let's get started with defining our small groups. We want to first make sure we understand where this fits into the Ask a National model, why we deliver small groups, and then we'll talk about the different types of small groups that there are. So let's first talk where this fits in the Ask a National model. I always like us to understand how all these pieces fit together so that we can really build a strong program that is effective and that has positive outcomes for students. So on this slide, you'll see those four components of the Ask a National model: define, manage, deliver, and assess. And they're highlighted in yellow. Under the deliver section is where these small groups fit. We're providing the direct student service of a small group, and we can provide it in the areas of instruction, appraisal, and advisement, or counseling. And we'll talk about what those different types of small groups look like. You'll see there under deliver, we also provide indirect student services, and that is also one of the categories of the deliver component. But today, these small groups fall mostly under the direct student service. Again, here, just reiterating that deliver component is made up of both the direct student services and the indirect, and we want to be spending 80% of our time in this deliver component. And that's why small groups fit so perfectly into this. Again, just making sure we understand that as school counselors, we are providing services to our students that can really help to improve student outcomes. And that is what we're here for. Now, if I haven't convinced you yet that this fits into the Ask a National model and into comprehensive school counseling, you can see here on this document, which is straight out of the Ask a National model, that under that appropriate activities for school counselors column, you will find short-term individual and small group counseling services listed. So small groups are definitely an appropriate activity. Now, it is important to keep in mind that we do want our counseling services to be short term as school counselors. If our students are in need of long-term therapeutic counseling, whether in a small group setting or individually, we do want to use our indirect student service of making a referral at that point. You can see there in the other column that providing that long-term counseling to address psychological disorders is not an appropriate activity. That's when we would want to make a referral to someone who can provide that service to our student. but short-term individual and small group counseling, totally appropriate, and that's why we're here to talk about it today. So let's talk types of small groups. When I said that our direct student services are broken up into these three categories: instruction, appraisal and advisement, and counseling, our small groups also fit in to each of those. So let's talk about it. First off is that instructional small groups. I think these are probably the most popular. This is when school counselors work with small groups of students to provide instruction and activities that are designed to improve student success. Right? So most of our small groups that we're probably pretty used to running or have heard about before probably fall under this category. So some examples include sometimes we provide academic small groups that are instructional in nature, and that would be topics such as study skills or goal setting. I often did test prep small groups or motivational support or some sort of topic like that related to academics, but we're providing instruction on how to build a skill or how to improve um, their skills to have more success in the areas of academics. So those are pretty popular, right? I'm sure a lot of things are coming to mind for you. We can also provide instructional small groups in the areas of career. So that's our other domain. We have the academic domain, then we have the career domain. And sometimes we might provide small groups around specific career interests. So I know this presentation is targeted for my elementary school counselors out there. So that might be a little trickier. You may not want to run a small group for kindergartners who are interested in being doctors. That might be an interesting experience. I don't know. You might want to. It might be fun. If you do, let me know. I want to hear about it. Um, but if you work with middle school or high school in the secondary, that's definitely appropriate. And I always tell the example of the time that when I was working at an elementary school, and I did run a group for elementary age students who would be first generation college students. So if and when they got to that age, they would be the first in their family to go to college. And so I ran that small group for fourth and fifth graders, and it was really impactful. It was really a great experience. And mostly what we did is dive into what colleges were like. We did some virtual tours of colleges. It would have been really fun if we could have done a real visit, which we weren't able to, but maybe you could. I also got some professors to share about their experiences and what it's like to teach at a college. What else did we do? We looked at mascots. We all sorts of fun stuff that most students, if they have a parent who went to college, might get from their parents or their caregivers, but that these students may not get. Just that exposure piece, which I think is so important when we're talking college and career at the elementary level. So you could definitely get creative and think about some career instructional small groups you could host. And then social emotional small groups, definitely the most popular, especially for my elementary friends. These are those small groups that are topics like stress management. We're providing instruction on stress management skills, how to effectively manage stress, or self regulation, or overcoming obstacles, or positive approaches for building self management or social skills. This would also include like those emotion management small groups. I did a lot of understanding our emotions or anger management or identifying our emotions. I also did a lot of mindfulness small groups that would fall under this. I was providing instruction on how to use mindfulness to increase our social and emotional skills. So definitely the most popular, I think. Now, that second area of small groups is appraisal and advisement. Again, this is a little less relevant for my elementary school counselors that are joining us today because appraisal and advisement is really that two-part process where we first appraise and where we're working with students to analyze and assess their abilities, interests, skills, and achievement. And then we're helping with that advisement piece, which is making recommendations based on the appraisal piece. So I know if you're a secondary school counselor, this is very familiar. So I want to mention it because sometimes we forget we can do this appraisal and advisement in small groups. We don't have to do it all one-on-one, right? I think it's so beneficial for our kids to be able to hear others' um, responses and how they are seeing their abilities and their interests and the decisions they're making. That's really impactful to do in a group setting. And obviously it's easier for us too if we can provide that support with more than one student at the same time. So no matter where you are, think through what this could look like. I never did this as an elementary school counselor, but I think it could be cool to do a small group where you allowed students to do interest inventories and look at possible career options or career pathways. That first generation college student group I think that'd be a great activity. I didn't do that, but it could be a really neat way to strengthen that domain in your school counseling program. And then that third type of small group is the counseling small groups. So these are the small groups that are more based on providing professional assistance or support, specifically during times of transition or heightened stress, when big changes are happening, or other unique situations that is impeding student success. So the first things that come to mind when I think about this are like our grief small groups or our divorce small groups, or maybe even small groups for new students. If you run some sort of group that helps with that transition, things like that are typically more counseling focused. So again, just to help reiterate the difference, those instructional small groups are more teaching skills, helping our students learn a skill or understand a concept. And these counseling small groups are a little more therapeutic. They're based in those counseling theories and techniques, and they are more likely to help with those specific needs that come up in a child's life, right? So again, just to reiterate, we've got those three types. Now, don't get too worked up over knowing exactly the difference between an instruction small group about emotions and a counseling small group about grief. It's not that big of a deal if you don't know the difference or if you're not exactly sure. The reason I wanted to cover this is because it can help us to diversify the small groups we offer if we really understand all the different types we are capable of running as comprehensive school counselors. So if you're really heavy on the instructional small groups, that's how I always was, that I could use some additional counseling small groups when I was in the school setting. I could have really strengthened that piece of my program. So just think through kind of where you are. If all of this is brand new, you get to just start with one that you're most comfortable with. All right. So start small and we'll build from there. Now, I want to mention these additional types of small groups real quick because I get this question quite a bit about things that might be small groups of students, but they're not a typical small group. So things that are a little more informal, like maybe you're hosting a book club or a kindness club or a yoga club. I always loved adding those different components to my comprehensive school counseling program. They were neat ways to help target different students who needed different things. But I wouldn't have really considered them small groups like we're talking about today because they functioned quite differently. For example, there wasn't confidentiality within these types of groups, or there weren't norms within these types of groups. Students could come and go. Like the book club I hosted, I always hosted a book club and we read the book Wonder and it was great and I loved it. But students weren't required to come to every session. It was okay if one day they wanted to eat lunch with their friends instead of having lunch with us to discuss the book, or maybe they didn't read the chapter yet and so they didn't want to come, or whatever it may be. So they're just much more informal. But these are great additions to a comprehensive school counseling program. I've heard great things about implementing No Place for Hate in our programs, or different multicultural clubs. I did student council when I was a school counselor because it wasn't up and running in our school, and I thought our students could really benefit from the leadership experience. So I loved leading that, but it wasn't really a small group. All right. So hopefully that makes sense to kind of differentiate that. All right, so now we're going to transition into how we manage our small groups. So this is what I call that behind the scenes work to make sure that we are really doing that work to make sure they're going to be successful. If we jump right into delivering the small group, we're missing out on those important pieces to make sure we're serving the right students and we're basing our decisions in data and we're really planning out the small group. So we don't want to skip this step. So let's talk about it. So in the manage component, we're really doing that behind the scenes planning. We're determining our participants and we're preparing for our group. I love this quote. I use it all the time in my presentations, and I think it fits well here too, because as school counselors, we don't want to just be pulling our students out of the river. We want to go upstream and find out why they're falling in and put supports in place right away. And small groups are a great thing that we can do. I don't want all of my small groups to be reactive to students who have already fallen in. I want to be able to look at my data and figure out who needs this additional support and provide it right away. And that's what we can do when we appropriately plan our small groups and we use some data to drive how we determine who our participants are. So there's a lot of different data we can use and a lot of different ways we can determine our participants. So we can look at that academic and college and career and social emotional data collected from those 3 domains. So again, my first generation college students group, or maybe an academic group could be focused on students who have more than 3 zeros on assignments, or social emotional students who are struggling to make friends. Maybe I'm noticing some kids who are often isolated at recess or that sort of thing. So we can use that type of data to help select participants. We also want to look at that outcome data, those areas of attendance and achievement and discipline, right? So students who have a specific number of behavior referrals related to a certain topic. I often did a small group for students who had a certain number of behavior referrals related to disruption, and I did a self-control small group with them. So I was using data to identify the students and then putting a small group in place that specifically met the needs of those students. And then, of course, we can also look at those achievement scores, so test scores, things like that, if we're running an academic group. Attendance groups can be really successful, especially maybe you're targeting a certain group that has a certain number of tardies, and you run the small group first thing in the morning, and you make it something they really want to be at. And so that can really help with those attendance data points as well. So there's a lot of different data we can look at to help determine our participants. We can also use referrals, our teacher referrals. Often teachers will come to us and say, I have this student struggling with this. Could they be in your small group? Or could you help them with, something? You could say, oh, I'm running a small group on that, or I'm planning to. Yes, I'll put them on my list. Principal, I often worked very closely with my principals, and they would help me to know when students were getting sent to the office or getting multiple behavior referrals for a similar topic, and then we could plan a small group around it. Or sometimes the principal was just aware of things that could make an appropriate referral. And of course, our parents and our caregivers, right? They often come to us needing more assistance with their child. And so we can use those referrals as well. Now, my caution here, if we only use these type of referrals to select participants, is that there can be equity issues. We know that students will fall through the cracks if we only use these types of referrals. There will be students that teachers never refer, or that caregivers don't know that they could make that referral, that sort of thing. So I really caution against only using referrals for your participants, because I want us to really provide an equitable opportunity for students to participate. Now, I didn't list it here, but I have had students come and make a self-referral too, and that's great too. But you have to know, again, if you feel that that's an equitable opportunity. Did everyone know they could self-refer, that sort of thing? And also be aware, if you tell them they can self-refer, you might have a whole lot volunteer. But that's a good problem to have. But just think through what this process could look like for you. I also really recommend if you're getting a lot of teacher, principal, and caregiver referrals, maybe create a form so you can get more information about why they're making the referral to make sure that a small group is an appropriate intervention. Maybe they actually need to be referred out for therapeutic counseling, or maybe they actually need a mentor or a different type of support to make sure that we're doing our best to make sure that the students are a good fit for the small group. Then, of course, your expertise as the school counselor. I never, ever, ever want to downplay your expertise and what you know about kids. I know that as school counselors, sometimes we know kids better than anyone else. And sometimes we know things about them that other people don't know, things that might be kept confidential, like students who are in foster care with incarcerated parents or have experienced death or divorce. All of those things could be appropriate reasons to select the student for a small group. But again, just being aware that we don't know everything and that parents don't always report everything, and that there could still be equity issues there, again, if we're only using our expertise to select participants. So what I really recommend is using a well-rounded approach of all of these things we're talking about. Use that data, use referrals from others, use what your expertise, all of those things together can really help us to eliminate the potential of leaving out students who need the support. All right, so now let's talk about how you plan for your small groups. So let's talk about some of the details. Size is a topic that often comes up. How big? How many students should I have? And it really varies. So I say here, and ASCA recommends that small groups should include up to 10 students. Personally, I prefer smaller than that. I think 10 can be a little hard to manage, especially if I'm the only adult. And we're talking elementary, so often it takes a little bit of wrangling, a little bit of classroom management, small group management. So for me, I prefer smaller, 3 to 6 typically, but it also depends on the topic. So for example, I mentioned that I often did a small group on for students who had multiple behavior referrals related to like off-task behavior in the classroom. And I did a self-control small group with them. I loved it. It was so much fun. Teachers loved it. It was typically pretty effective. But for that group, I only ever had 3 students at a time. It was typically a first grade small group. And oh my goodness, can you imagine if I had many more than 3 of students who had behavior referrals for off-task behavior? You can imagine how chaotic it could be. So think that through before you determine a size that you always do. It also depends on your space, if you don't have a lot of room, those types of factors. Length of the small group. 4 to 12 weeks is what you typically hear, for typically 20 minutes to an hour for each session. I, again, personally prefer somewhere between 5 and 8 weeks for about 30 to 45 minutes, especially if we're talking elementary. There is some research out there that shows that evidence-based group counseling curriculums are usually at least 8 group sessions. So keep that part in mind as well. But if you're not using an evidence-based curriculum, then you have a little bit more say in that, and maybe they need to be shorter. And again, think developmental level of the kids you're working with. It's not going to be effective, even if the research supports it, if we put students who developmentally can't handle 8 weeks for 45 minutes. If if that's too much, then it's not going to be successful. So think about your students and use your best judgment. But no, these are some parameters you can use. Let's see, time of the day. This is always a tricky one too. I know every school is so different. The last school I was at really allowed me to have pretty much free reign to run small groups at the end of the day. What I would do is I would go pick them up from their class, and they'd bring their backpacks and everything they needed for dismissal. And we would run small groups, usually about 30 minutes. And then I would take them out for dismissal. So that worked pretty good, because in our elementary school, that was kind of the time of the day that they were packing up, cleaning up, prepping to go home. So they didn't miss out on much. I know I've talked to other school counselors who at their school, morning was a good time. That wasn't great at my school because we did morning meetings in every classroom, and so they would have missed that important piece, so I didn't want to take them out of that. Um, some schools have like a response to intervention time or some sort of block of time that is for tiered interventions. If you have that, excellent. This is a great tier 2 intervention, and it is totally appropriate to run a small group during that time. So that would fit beautifully. But I know not everyone has that luxury. Lunch is possible. I would kind of say that's probably a last resort. It's really hard to run an effective group, a formal group during lunch. Now, you could do a lunch bunch, which is a more informal setting. But if you're trying to follow a curriculum, trying to follow a lesson plan, I've just found you can't really get much done during lunch because kids are eating and it's just too difficult to get it fitted all in. But if that's all you have, that's all you have, and it's somewhere to start, right? All right, caregiver permission. This, unfortunately, I can't give you a real clear-cut answer because it depends on your school and your principal and your district. So some schools want you to get a permission slip signed for every kid in every small group, and some don't. So you're going to have to check with your school and see what they prefer. I always liked it if it was an option to do an opt-out form, meaning I sent a form home talking about the group topic, giving the caregiver some information. But if it didn't get returned, that meant they could participate. It was an opt-out, so it was them signing, saying, no, I don't want my student to participate. And that helped because that way they could still participate if it wasn't returned. I recommend sending something, even if your school doesn't require it, because you want your caregivers to know what your kids are learning about. I always sent home multiple documents to identify what we'd learned for the day. Ideally, I liked to do it after every session. That didn't always happen, but I like to send that home so that if caregivers wanted to, they could reinforce what we were learning at home. That's really impactful. But permission can be a little bit tricky. So talk with your principal, see what works best for your school, and kind of go from there. All right, so really ideally, we want our small groups to be based on our student data, aligned with the goals that we have for our school counseling program, written into our action plans, included on our annual and weekly calendars, targeted to meet those Ask a Student standards, and then planned using the lesson plan template. Now that sounds like a mouthful, but what I did there is I identified all the different elements of a comprehensive school counseling program that you can align with these small groups. So I showed you this screen earlier where I had highlighted in yellow where small groups fit into the Ask a National model. Now added in red shows all the different areas that can be aligned with your small groups. So this is really showing how powerful a strong comprehensive school counseling program can be when we get all the dots connected, right? We're not doing random acts of counseling. We're doing counseling that's driven by our standards, that's aligned with our goals, that's written into our action plans, using a lesson plan to really increase the effectiveness. And then we're looking at our results report to make sure it worked, right? So you can see there that really strengthens, makes our program so much more robust than if we just say, I think I'm going to do a small group on friendship skills because this is a cute book and it looks like a fun activity. Again, guilty, but that's not a true comprehensive school counseling. We want all of these pieces to be aligned. And that's when we really strengthen our program and we are really able to advocate for the difference we're making in our students. All right, so now let's talk delivery. We're going to talk about how we deliver our small groups. So this is when we get to do the fun stuff, right? This is the good stuff. So when we talk about delivering small groups, we always get the question, what should they be? What are the topics? What should we talk about? What should my small groups be about? And unfortunately, I can't tell you that because I don't know what your data says and I don't know what your students need. And I don't know what topics you're covering in classroom lessons and if your school has a school-wide SEL curriculum or if you have values that you reinforce at your school. All of those things are going to come together to help you determine the topics that you teach. Now, ideally, we're using a curriculum to drive and to teach our small groups. So there are some listed there. There's some links there of some resources you can use to find good curriculums. But ideally, we're using a curriculum because it's research-based and because it can show that we're not just doing these random acts of counseling, right? Plus, it makes it so much easier on you because the lessons are already created. Now, I know not everyone has access to those types of curriculum, which is why I am totally okay with you creating your own if that's your only option. I would rather you create your own than not run any small groups at all. But really try to advocate for the use of a curriculum. Just like math teachers teach a math curriculum, we should be teaching using a curriculum as well. Now, a quick caution about teachers pay teachers. That's a popular one to find these small group curriculums, and there are some great ones out there. I have some in binders right behind me that I have used and loved and really saw great success. But some teachers pay teachers curriculums are better than others. It's a really, really long continuum of the strengths of some of those available. So do your homework, do a little bit of research, look into the curriculums if you're going to buy them on Teachers Pay Teachers. For example, some of them are aligned with the Ask a Student standards or the CASEL competencies or other different standards or competencies to make it more substantial. Others are just really random, and that's when we're going back to those random acts of counseling if they're not based on anything. So if you're going to use Teachers Pay Teachers, just try to find some that are a little more based in those standards. All right, and we want to use a lesson plan to design as we deliver our small groups, right? Because again, we're getting away from random acts of counseling. So the lesson plan template that ASCA has is a great outline of how to provide a really strong lesson. We can use the same template for our classroom lessons, and we can use that for our small groups as well. And it asks us for these 7 different areas. We want to include information in each of these, but let's just take a look at the lesson plan template. So this is what it looks like. If you don't have this downloaded, you can just go to ASCA's website and download the template. And you can see here that you can work your way through, putting your name, your lesson plan title. Then we're doing small groups, so you'll check the small group box there, and you'll say which lesson this is. So if it's lesson 1 of 6, just write 1 of 6. Then we're going to identify the evidence base. So hopefully we're using a research-based or evidence-based curriculum, but if not, select what we are using. Then ideally, we're aligning this with those Ask a Student standards. Remember, we talked about that already. So what student standards is this small group targeting? So if my small group is an academic instructional small group on goal setting, I'm going to select the mindset and behavior statement that goes along with goal setting, right? Hopefully, I also have some learning objectives that I can list. If that's new to you, if you're not sure how to write those, just skip that part for now. But I also have more webinars that I talk about that, and you're welcome to check those out to help you figure out how you can write those learning objectives. They're really easy once you get used to the formatting. All right, then the next part of the template is the really good part that I promise you will be really helpful if you start using. Because this has you list all the materials you need so that when you run this small group next year, you don't have to think, wait, what arts and crafts materials do I need? What book did I use? What curriculum pages do I need? You just list it all right there. So it really makes it easy to rerun this group later. You can just say, oh, all right, I'm in lesson 1 of this unit, and here are the materials. I got my markers, I got my paper, I got my curriculum binder, I have it targeted, or I have it flagged, page 16 starts this lesson, whatever it is. And it's all listed there, so that's super helpful. Then it just has you go through the different parts of a lesson, just like a teacher would do. You're going to introduce the lesson. You're going to communicate the lesson objective. We want our kids to know what they're supposed to learn from this. That is an element of a good lesson. So this really strengthens the lessons we're providing. We want to teach the content. We want them to have an opportunity to practice the content. And then we want to summarize what we learned and close. So every small group should follow this progression. And our classroom lessons should too. So our students are going to become really familiar with how we run our lessons, and that will really strengthen what we provide. Now, the next page of the lesson plan template is where we get into the data collection. So you'll see you have the 3 types of data: participation, our mindsets and behaviors data, and our outcome data. Now, again, we're not diving too deep into data in this session, but I have more out there. You can check those out if this is new to you. But ideally, for our small groups, we have our participation data, who is participating and for how long. We have that mindsets and behavior data collected through pre and post tests. And then we have that outcome data. How are our students different as a result of this small group? So those pieces are really important. But again, don't not run the small group because of this. If this is too much for you right now, leave this page blank and just do the rest for now. You'll get more comfortable as you go. And then the last little bit of the lesson plan template just has you think through some follow-up plans. I'm really glad they include this because sometimes you might have students that miss one of your small groups and you need to think through what your plan is if they miss that. If it only has 6 sessions and they miss one, how are you going to make sure they make up that content? And then what if the pre and post tests show they didn't master the skills? What's your plan then? Are you going to provide the content in a different way? Are you going to work individually with the student? Are you going to make a referral? Are you going to talk with the caregivers? What are you going to do to help the student master those skills, right? And that's it. That's the lesson plan template. So you can see there, it's a great way to really strengthen and provide a more robust small group. All right, some fun things you can add while you're delivering your small groups. Now, again, hopefully we're following a curriculum, but it doesn't mean you can't supplement the curriculum with some fun activities. Remember, an important part of a small group is that we're really building positive morale within our group. We want to set group norms and expectations. We want to have respect for fellow group members. We want to build a really, really trusting culture within our small groups. So that sometimes means we need to add in things like icebreakers and team building activities and things like that. So here's some fun ideas for icebreakers. I'm sure you've heard of most of these, but I just wanted to list them out for you to give you ideas as you start planning. I always like rosebud and thorn, or highs and lows, or sun and storm. That's always kind of the same thing of saying something really good that's happened that day and maybe something not as good, but it gives them a chance to kind of share how their day's going. It gives you a good way to kind of adjust in case the students are having a tough day, or just gives you a good little bit of information as you get started and gives everyone an opportunity to share, which can be really helpful. 2 truths and a lie is always fun. How charged are you? That just uses like a battery, like a phone or tablet battery image, and allows students to reflect on how they're feeling. Creating a group handshake. Would you rather is a lot of fun. Would you rather go to the beach or the mountains? Would you rather, how that goes. And you can Google all sorts of examples. Friendly debates are fun little icebreakers. We would do things like Reese's or Snickers and have them have a little friendly debate. Again, just gets them talking, warms them up a little bit, especially if the students don't know each other very well, depending on who's within the group. A feelings check-in. I always did this for any of my groups that were social and emotional instructional groups, and we're targeting teaching different emotion management type skills. It's always good to kind of start off with a little feelings check-in. So there's all sorts of ones out there, things like a 2-word check-in, or I love the idea of a feelings check-in using weather terms. What's a weather term to describe how you're feeling today? Sunny, stormy, rainy, cloudy, tornado, all of those. So that's a fun one for younger kids. Or to act out the feeling. Those are all really fun ones. And again, quick Google icebreakers. You can find all sorts of things out there. But don't forget to write these into your lesson plan so that you do have that time to build that positive culture within your group. Now, here are some engaging strategies for lesson planning. So remember, let's go back real quick here. When they practice content in your small groups, you want to do it in engaging ways. We want to be good teachers in this sense. And here are some good ways that they can practice the content. So through debates or games or maybe doing presentations or gallery walks, all sorts of creative things out there. And here's just a list to kind of help you brainstorm ways that they could practice the content. So in this one, you might be using a curriculum that teaches the content, but it may not have engaging strategies for them to practice the content. Some of the curriculums do, a lot of them do, but if they don't, you can supplement in this way. Or again, if you're creating your own, we definitely want to make sure we're implementing some of these to make sure that even though we're creating our own, we're doing it in the best way possible. Other fun activities to add, again, these could supplement a curriculum. We don't want this to be the whole small group, and some of them can end up lasting a long time. So be creative with how you kind of fit these in and make sure you still get to the good content. But there's all sorts of things out there you can do, all sorts of group activities. That snack factory simulation, I heard about this one recently in a webinar about attendance, small groups or attendance initiatives. And the school counselor was talking about how she did a small group for students who were having a lot of absences. And one thing they did in their group was a snack factory stimulation, which what she would do is she had them make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. I think she used sun butter because you want to be careful of peanut allergies. But they had like a assembly line set up with all the group members. They all had a different task. One got the bread out, one put the sun butter on, one put the jelly on, one put the other piece of bread on top, and one put it into a baggie or something like that. And then the school counselor would take away someone and say, oh, Sarah was late for work today, so she's not here. She's out of the assembly line. And maybe I was the sun butter spreader. So then the team has to figure out, how do we now make a sandwich without Sarah? And so anyway, it's a fun little group activity and a good way to teach the importance of attendance and showing up on time. And that was what the topic of that small group was. So I thought that was really cool. And you could alter that to whatever your need is. I know food can be tricky, so maybe you could do like a Lego building simulation kind of thing, but there's lots of cool ways you can do that. I often did a parachute. I had just a real kind of cheap Amazon parachute that I got. And we would do different activities to show the importance of teamwork and group work with that. Games are always good. Again, that friendly debate, love those ideas. I ran a mindfulness group, and we would always create breathing bottles as a team. So we each had our different part in creating those water bottles that have like glitter in them, and you can shake them and help as you take deep breaths. And then they got to take them home at the end of the group. So that was always fun. Things like that. Using books, using art, using acting, all sorts of those kind of things are fun ways to supplement, hopefully, a curriculum. But if you don't, making sure you're adding these in to make your lessons more engaging. All right, so then we want to assess our small group, because we've run our small group, we've used our lesson plan, but we got to make sure it works, right? Especially if we're not using a research-based curriculum, we have no idea if what we're doing is effective. But luckily, we have a small group results report to use to help us measure the effectiveness. So this is another document you can download from that Ask a website when you go to the templates. And it's really designed to ensure that we're assessing if what we're doing is working. And I know this can be scary because you don't want it to show that what you're doing isn't working, but don't be afraid of that, because that's okay if it shows that what we're doing isn't working. What's not okay is that if what we're doing isn't working, but we never assess it, so we just keep doing it over and over. It's a waste of our time, it's a waste of our students' time, and it's just not good, strong, comprehensive school counseling. Excuse me, I'm talking too much. All right, let's keep going. So this is what that small group results report looks like. I'm not going to go through this, but make sure you're using it to assess your group. You can see here you put in all your data. Excuse me. All right. And then we have our final slide here. As we think through step by step, what a small group looks like. We went through all of this, but this will just help you as you think through what this looks like in your setting. So I hope that you can see here how each of these steps is really important to run an effective group. Now, if you don't do all of these, that's okay. But hopefully, we're working towards really effective small groups from start to finish, doing all of these steps. All right. Now, I'm not going to take a look at the example here because we're running short on time. But if you would like to look at example, please reach out. Here's some great resources to help you as you continue to learn more. Here's my contact information. I'm more than willing to share my example with you. A lot of what I shared today was my example, but I'm happy to share my lesson plan template if that would be beneficial to you. Just email me and I'll send that your way. But thank you for joining me today. Thank you for your interest in learning more about implementing small groups in elementary schools. They're so important. They're so impactful. They can make such a big difference for our students. We just want to make sure we do them with intention and make them as effective as we can. So I hope this was helpful. Like I said, please reach out. Please follow me on Instagram. I'm always trying to share good ideas there as well. Thank you for the work you do to serve your students and to support your school. It makes such a big difference. And I will see you next time. Thanks so much. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.